just tell us a little bit about what happened on Noordhoek Beach all those years ago, because that was very formative for you.
Can I just say before I get to that, it's just something that's slightly on my heart, but I've just been thinking about, like, in our culture, and it may well, because we're living in the same world, be similar here. It might not be quite the same, but our culture is telling our young people a lie, at best a half-truth, which is, build a life that's based around yourself. And why I say that is a half-truth is because what it's valuing is the dignity of each person. And actually that is a profoundly Christian concept in origin, which has somehow got corrupted. And one of the things that's just really struck me, which might be obvious to you, but I don't think it would be obvious to me. Growing up in many civilizations around the world, particularly classical era and so forth, there was no prioritization of the individual, no recognition of everyone's inherent dignity and worth. If you grew up in a Greek or Roman culture, we often think they were the source of things like the Senate and democracy, but the truth was only if you were white, only if you were wealthy, only if you were male. If you were female, you had no voice, you had no recognition, you were seen as lesser. If you were a slave, you weren't really seen as human in the same way. And the message of the New Testament that in Jesus Christ there is no male or female, no Greek or Jew, no rich or poor, that we are all one. This message that every single person is made in the image of God and has dignity is one of the most powerful messages that comes from the gospel. And so there is a half-truth that each person, including each of us here, and everyone we drive past and everybody all around us is made with the imprint of God, and their life has inherent, unbelievable dignity, and we've got to call it out from each other. And so, but somehow that insight, which has become the dominant kind of recognition in the Western world, has now become kind of orphaned, and it's like we're just trying to find ourselves wherever we can without paying attention to those around us. But in the gospel, the message that we have dignity is held in tension, almost in paradox, with another message, which is that actually, even though we all have profound dignity, we find our life in relationship to others. By giving to others, by serving others, by loving others, we become more. That's what I saw in South Africa, in those people that were giving themselves, and they gained more from it. And somehow, when we take ourselves and we focus on ourselves, we diminish. And the interesting thing is, we live in a culture in our country where people are told to grasp things for themselves, and yet at the same time there is more dis-ease, there is more mental health problems. The anxiety amongst the younger generation is unprecedented in the world. People are trying to grasp life, but they can't find it anywhere. And I just wanted to encourage you that, we have like the original source. We have like the wisdom that leads to life, which both accounts for the dignity of people, but also accounts for what really makes for flourishing and really, really makes for growth. The tension that I was grappling with, and still continue to grapple with, oh God, how are we going to let the world know how to live well? And I was on a walk on Noordhoek Beach, it must be 20 years ago or so, and I wasn't praying about this question at all. I don't know what we were doing. I think we were praying, but that's something completely different. And for the only time so far in my life, I had what I would describe as an open vision, completely unexpectedly, out of the blue. But suddenly I suddenly saw this really vivid, and it wasn't like seeing a picture. It was like it was happening around me, and I saw this sense of a river rushing fast out, and somehow I knew that it was the tide was rushing out. And in the middle of this river was this group of people with what I saw to be like a big standard pole, a big flagpole, which had been knocked over in the force of the tide. And all these people were trying to push it back up again. But what I could see was it was a completely futile exercise, because with the force of the river, it was never going to stand up. And what I understood in this picture was that this was an image of the church and culture. The river was like the culture, which had turned hard and was running out fast. And it had pushed over the age-old standard pole of Christian life and values. And the response very easily of the Christian community was just to come in there and try and fight against it and push the old standard pole back up. And what I felt God was saying to me clearly was, that is a totally futile exercise. All it's going to do is create tension and animosity and fight, and it's just never going to work. And I can remember saying to God, wow, how utterly depressing. Is that it? And then immediately, suddenly my eyes were taken to the side of the river. And what I started to see there was suddenly this new construction. It was a bit kind of Middle Eastern. It was like beautiful bronze domed roofs and all sorts for some reason, but the sun was glinting off it. But beautiful buildings were beginning to emerge and be built. And as they were, the people in the culture, they're kind of racing down along the river. They were looking at what was emerging. It's like, what's that? What's happening there? I want to go and see it. I'm going to go explore that. What is it? And I felt what God was saying to me, the route towards causing people to look again and see again his wisdom was not just to stand and confront and condemn and oppose all the time, but it is to build beautiful things on the side of the river for people to come and look at and see. And that our task at our time, and this is a word for our time in our season, it might not be for all times, but the word for our time is to build, just to demonstrate. And that can be in myriad ways. That is like how you are building what you're building in your workplaces. It's how we're modeling our homes, our community. It is actually rebuilding society. And in the book of Isaiah, in Isaiah 58, there is this passage which is all about Israel have just come back from exile. They've been longing to come back to Jerusalem because they knew God had called them there, and they called them to be a powerful witness there. And they were so excited to come back. But when they got back there, after a while, they thought that everything was going to happen. God was going to be amazed. Just their witness was going to shine. But in fact, Jerusalem was still in ruins, and they just weren't seeing any breakthrough, any power, any witness. And so they cried out to God, and they said, God, what's going on? This is the beginning of Isaiah 58. It says, we're doing all the spiritual things you've called us to do. We're wearing sackcloth and ashes. We're fasting. We're going through our sacrifices, and we're not seeing your light, and we're not seeing your glory, and we're not seeing your power. And that is what we're kind of saying when we look at the 2%. Like, what's going on? Everything's declining. And God said to them this. He said, is that the only kind of fast that I've called you to? All the spiritual stuff is really important. But haven't I also called you to share your bread with the hungry, your clothes with the naked, to take care, to visit, to care for those in prison, to turn towards your own flesh and blood, to spend yourselves on behalf of the hungry? Isn't that what I've called you to do? In other words, to do the stuff, to build the buildings, to model what it looks like. And he said, when you do that, then your light will rise in the darkness, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. And he says this in verse 12. He says, your people will rebuild the ancient ruins. They will raise up the age-old foundations, and you will be called repairer of broken walls and restorer of streets with dwellings. And I just think this is the image that God has given us. Our job is to uncover the ancient foundations and to build on them, because when they do, it's going to create something so beautiful that the world is going to look at it again, and the power of God is going to be released. So that was a vision, and it continues to inspire me to this day.
Sure.
It's wonderful. Fantastic.
Especially in a world that's so polarized. It's either I'm for you or I'm against you, and I'm fighting you or I'm not fighting you. And to hear that God is calling us to build new pictures, that's exciting. I want to jump in on that. But we also really want to spend some time in prayer and worship before we head off this evening. So we've got 3 more really practical questions about everything that you've shared. And then we'd love for you to lead us in a time of prayer and worship.